Good afternoon, everybody. I want to welcome you to the next project conversation. This is episode 20. We've been on this journey just exploring what's next. The reality is that we live in a world that is constantly changing. There's so many different facets that we're all dealing with on a daily basis. One of the things that have really come to the forefront over the past few weeks is dealing with education. We have to figure out what to do next year as far as primary and middle school and high school and colleges. What does it look like to be in the space dealing with education, dealing with the challenges? I'm so blessed today to have one of my good friends, one of the most brilliant minds in the United States as far as teaching and the art and science of teaching. He also understands particularly the challenges that face Black and brown children in spaces and education, and why we need to look at new modes and forms. So I want to welcome to the next project conversation my good friend, Dr. Bryan Brown. How you doing, sir?
Well, what's up, man? How are you? It's good to be here. How's everything?
It's going good, man. I feel like this conversation's been long overdue. I mean, you were one of the people that convinced me to even start the next project conversations. So I'm grateful to you. I just want to just start our conversation off and talk a little bit about some of the challenges and some of the things you've seen around education over the past few months.
That's a loaded question. Well, I'll start by saying I really feel for the teachers and have a great deal of appreciation for how they managed an unreal situation. We joke around here like, hey, this is my first pandemic, right? So if it's your first time, no one really knew what to do. And the real failure was in that we didn't have educational products to really help our teachers. And we didn't have technology that was really turnkey for teachers to tap into. More importantly, we didn't have authentic understanding of what the realities of our kids are. So for example, kids were given homework assignments or given online assignments where they're supposed to log in and get connected to a discussion with their teacher via Zoom. Sounds great. But if I have two brothers and sisters or three of us in a household, right, how many functional devices do I have? That's not to say that there is a laptop in the home, because a lot of the digital divide is truly misunderstood. Like, people don't throw away cell phones, right? If I get a cell phone, I have a new model, what do? I'm giving it to my son or daughter, right? And so there are cell phones at the house, but there weren't 3 laptops. And if there were laptops, was it functional enough to be able to get the kids connected? And so in the real moment, teachers were panicking, parents were panicking, and we just entered a moment that we weren't prepared for. And so part of what educators have to do now is really reinvent the entire process, and it's going to be a huge challenge for the coming year.
So I have a question for you. What have you seen as you described a couple of things? Let's talk a little bit about the digital divide first. Can you define it for people? Because people often hear it, and I know I worked with Reverend Jackson and some other folks on the internet, and one of the big ways we define it is lack of internet access at home. But you've expanded that a little bit in your definition that you just shared. Can you share a little bit more about the digital divide and the challenges that you're seeing around that?
Certainly. So for kind of the public at large, here's the idea that the digital divide is the notion that there are fundamental access differences between impoverished people of color and people, and white people broadly, people by wealth and economic status. But here's the thing: what do you mean by that? And so the argument is that it's just assumed that people of color don't have laptops, people of color don't have tablets, don't have smartphones. And so if you look closer, it's a much different situation. So for example, wireless access and how fast your wireless is, that's a matter of wealth. So if I can pay for unlimited streaming minutes, that's a completely different experience than a person who is on a structured low-cost alternative. So for example, do you have Metro PCS, which is on time limited, or do you have something extremely expensive like Verizon or AT&T where you have endless minutes? And so what I found in schools is that when you go into school and you talk to kids, they have wireless access. They just know that they're limited. So we did a virtual reality project a few years ago. And here's what was interesting. Some kids said, well, I want to use my phone instead of using the phones we provided to watch the VR videos. But the question was, right? Can I get on your wireless network? Because my mom's going to kill me if I run these minutes up, right? So we need to rethink what we're talking about, because it's an issue of, number one, wireless access. Number two, device accessibility. Like if I have a laptop, I can make movies, I can make music, but I can't do that with a tablet in the same way, or a cell phone. So the idea must be expanded dramatically.
You know, that leads me into this. You did some research. You just published your first book. Can you tell us a little bit about that research in Science and City, and about what you saw in the African American population before we started dealing with COVID, and how it was impacting the study of the sciences and that kind of thing?
I think it's a. If you got a couple hours, I can explain it to you, but I'll try to keep it as brief as possible. Part of what we struggle with is just the possibilities. Like, think about it. What other field do they say, well, we've got to train the next generation of scientists? You don't hear English teachers saying, well, if you don't get an A in English right now, you're not going to be prepared to be a journalist, right? Or if you don't really kill this art project, we're not training the next generation of artists. And so there's this pressure and this lie, honestly, that only the academically and intellectually elite can be scientists. And so part of that is, if that's the culture that we live in, what are the signals that tell you, as a person of color, I can't be a scientist, right? So let me give you one. If I show up in chemistry and I'm the only Black person in the chemistry class and I struggle with it, it's hard, then I'm already going, well, maybe I'm not supposed to be here. Not just recognizing the fact that it's hard, but the social confines around who gets to do science is sending these explicit messages to kids that you're not part of the field. So that's pre-COVID. Right. And so if you think about the role of technology, we look at little things. If I'm watching a video and it's a video about science, what's the music in that video? Who are the accents? What do the people sound like? And we know that. You watch all these science videos, there are British accents. Everything about science is
older white gentlemen,
older white people. And it's like, people like you don't belong in this space. And so that psychological warfare is something that we address in our research.
Wow. What were some of the findings you found out of that? I like that you put it in that term, psychological warfare. What were some of the findings you found out with the psychological warfare, and how do you overcome the psychological warfare?
So part of what we were able to do is move kids who had negative attitudes towards science and shift them to having positive attitudes towards science. And so giving them a survey before and a survey after to see if we could change whether or not they say, I can do this. And so very simple. We just embedded cues in the technology to say you belong. And so instead of a voiceover from a British white male accent, we made sure that the voiceover came from students of color. The music in the background, we're playing contemporary music. It was things like Kendrick Lamar and the Migos in the background. And it's a subtle cue to say that you belong. The third thing is that when we teach the science that they're experiencing in the virtual world helps them analyze the community that they're in. And so by doing that, use the technology to send the signal that you're a part of this community, as well as teach basic science concepts. And so that's what we've been doing for the past 4 years.
Oh wow! So here goes a question for you. You see education from a study level on that PhD level, running a department at Stanford, dealing with high schoolers, and then you got your own kids. What do you think was the biggest failing at our first run of mass virtual teaching across all those domains?
So I think the first failing was that we tried to make the teaching at home the same as the teaching in school, as if the experiences and adults are experiencing this right now. Your meetings in person just feel different when you have to be connected in this digital space. So again, that goes to the first point that I was making, that the educators were not in the position to even know how to do it because there wasn't expertise that they could draw on. So for example, we use technology where the kids are asked questions and everybody's devices are connected. And so we can keep an entire group of 35 engaged and connected. But if a teacher doesn't know that, then what a teacher will do is just talk to the kids. And the kids are just suffering slowly as they're sitting and watching someone talk to them for an hour, right? And so part of what has to happen is for real reinvention of this distance learning as people are getting better at it.
We're coming into the fall. We're watching a lot of different avenues being presented something from all digital to split schedules. You know, whether it's the kids go to on A days and some kids go on B days. We're seeing colleges like Stanford do half people one quarter, half people other quarter. Tell me, what are your thoughts on these new approaches? Do you see one that's you feel at the initial thought is more effective? Can you just speak to it?
So I would be making it up if I gave you an answer on that one. Like we don't know that they're going to be effective. What's less and more effective? I do have one
Okay.
concern that I don't see being addressed, and it's the psychological, spiritual well-being of our kids.
Okay.
So what was taken from them was an opportunity to hang out with their friends. If you ask most kids, what do you like about school? It's the people. It's the playing, the talking, the having fun, the laughing, and so that is the part that I think needs to be addressed most fundamentally. How do we get our kids connected to the people in their lives, which are other kids? Because that laughter and that joy of being able to laugh and joke and be a child is different than transactional education. And so we think what we're really replacing is teaching them math or teaching them reading and teaching them science. That's not why you go to school. We could do homeschooling and focus on homeschooling if that didn't matter. And so I think part of what's missing is this idea of how to make sure our kids are connected digitally. Now, when you go to the plans, I do like there's wisdom in separating them by age, given as the research says that the younger kids are less likely to transmit the COVID-19 disease. But when we move forward, I think there needs to be greater communication between the district and the children themselves, the principals and the kids right now, because the kids are really left wondering what their future is, and that's harmful. It's a stressful situation for all the kids.
Can you talk? You said something in your last piece that I really like. Can you talk about the fact that education is not transactional? Because I think oftentimes, even in the church, when we do education, we change it into a transactional thing. So can you talk a little bit about why education is not transactional and those dimensions? Because I think because people look at it, I get an A, I get to go to the next grade, I get another A, I go to college, I get a good job. But that's only a component of education. So can you dive a little bit into that?
I think you said it well. I mean, it's a lie. A lot of the people who we feel are most successful in the world, it's not because they were straight A students. It's because they did something to impact the world. And the goal of a healthy education is to teach a person how to learn, to teach them how to deal with people, to teach them to control their circumstances so they can be empowered to be a healthy citizen in the world. And so part of what we're missing is with this idea that we think school is about transactional things, right? We get an A, we get prepared, we see the school as working for us. We never have a role in shaping that school community or the community at large. So what I want people to remember is the goal of school is to teach people things so that they can go out and change the world that they live in, not to just be a consumer in the particular environment, right? And so part of what we're missing in this environment is, are we building healthy human beings, right? Educate to change the world, educate to understand your situation. And so the things that kids need to know right now, they need to know about COVID. They need to know how it impacts people, why it impacts people of color more than other folks. And so we need to prepare our kids to be global and local citizens. And it's not a transactional kind of thing.
You know, in prior conversations, we talked about project-based learning and how that is very different from the traditional framework of how we grade kids. Can you talk a little bit about that and how does that play into COVID? Because I think that's going to become more critical because of the relational part and how kids grow and learn how to deal with problems.
So project-based learning is something I'm very fond of. Both of my kids went to a project-based learning school, and the idea is that we learn by doing. And so if you want a person to really learn, give them something to do and make sure that they explain this idea. And I'll give you an example. In doing a lesson on ancient civilizations. And so instead of just reading about an ancient civilization, what they did at this particular school was to create artifacts that represented the ancient civilization. They went to the beach and they buried the artifacts. The other, done in groups, the other group would go dig out their artifacts and do an analysis. Here's what the culture of these people were. This is the kind of things they ate. This is their knowledge type. This is their money. And so they present this analysis, and then the groups will talk about, right, here are these are the things you got right. These are the things you got wrong. But the point is is working together on problems is how we remember things. I use this example often. If you ask a person, what is your friend's phone number? It's likely you forgot all the phone numbers that you used to remember, except for maybe a parent, right? And the reason why that happened is because we don't remember things that we don't use. And so project-based learning is helpful because the knowledge is in context. And so we need more of that. In this new digital era, I would beg teachers to do that. As kids are at home, they're communicating with their families, they're communicating with the people in local neighborhoods. We want to use this situation, this current time, to empower kids to learn about what they're doing in their own community. It's important.
So, let's talk a little bit about the platforms that we would do project learning on. I'm not a fan of Zoom, I think, but I think everybody dove into Zoom. Are there technological tools that you can see that would facilitate this kind of learning and this type of interaction in both educational and in other spaces like churches, XYZ?
So there are, but I think Zoom is adequate, but
you're so much better than me.
I mean, they are a brand. I remember when Skype was the big deal, and Zoom has become the brand, and I appreciate what they offer. But here's the deal: is the tool is only as significant as how we use the tool. So one of the things that I know Zoom did to be more responsive is to add conversation rooms, little buttons where you can give critique. And so part of what has to happen is people need to learn how to use the tools. The tools are only part of the limitation, but we don't know how to use them yet. So for example, if you're teaching me scripture and how it applies to my life, and I'm listening to you teach me scripture, and I'm not going to really remember it unless I've written about it, right? Or you have me respond in some meaningful way. Here's how this applies to my life. It is that communication piece that's really empowering. And so what schools are learning right now, real time, is how to use the technology to engage in real, authentic student learning. Now, teachers know how students learn, so they're at an advantage. They know what to do. It's just a matter of learning how to use the tools.
Yeah, and I would agree with you. I think people know how to send out the code, and then you end up with this grid on the screen of multiple, and you don't use some of the share screen features, some of the Q&A features, some of the chat features, even the webinar functionality, which is more expensive but might be useful in different things. You introduced me to a science module program that was developed with some folks from Stanford. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think what they did was really good, and I think it might have some application for Christian educators.
Certainly. So for a lot of our teaching, we use a software called Nearpod. And what Nearpod does is enable you to control the other person's device. So this is great for teaching. So if all the kids log on and I go to a new screen, then their screens come with me. More importantly, it doesn't matter the kind of device. So cell phone, tablet, laptop, whatever. And so you're not really limited to a particular type of device. You don't need a high power video screen to do it. It's web-based. And so older devices will then work better. So that also enables you to play games. So you can do quizzes and people can then see themselves. It's an excellent tool. I've even seen educators do split screen. So one half of the screen is Zoom, and then they share their screen. The other half is a Twitter page, and they have the kids comment on the Twitter page or Google Sheet. So all the kids are just writing comments in the Google. So they're just keeping the people connected. And that's really the big idea, is that if children have to sit passively and listen to you, they're not learning, right? We learn by us explaining, by us analyzing, and we have to shift the context. I tease people because when you go to a chemistry class, right, the one thing you're not supposed to know is chemistry, right? And then the teacher asks you a bunch of questions about chemistry, and is surprised that you don't know the answers to the thing that they're supposed to be teaching you about, right? So the environment has to be different. The environment must be, we value wrong answers. Everybody's got to contribute. I can't help until you clearly articulate what it is that you need, what is it that you know, and I can teach from that point.
So, it's obvious our cousins in Texas and Florida are going to make the rest of us stay in the house till 2025 in Southern California. So what are some of the best practices you've seen, and what are some of the innovative things? As you were just talking about the Twitter on the split screen, Twitter on the side, that's like brand new stuff to us. So I think you see a lot of this stuff. What have you seen that's really good best practices that you could see us roll into?
So one of the things that I really did not anticipate were people just getting people together. So colleagues saying, "Hey, I got a group of young kids of color. I want to get them on a Zoom together to talk about what college looks like for us." So people that would never get connected because of distance are now being connected because of distance. Part of what I think is happening is our networks are expanding pretty dramatically, right? So I'm not sure if there's one person here or two people here, but a 12 o'clock talk at the church, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, no one's going, right? But you can leave this up for weeks, and now you're communicating to hundreds of people, right? So the idea of how we think about education is definitely changing, and people are being inventive. One thing I can say that I've seen that seems to work well is just using the video as the room, meaning we get everybody in the same place, but all the work has to happen online in different pages. And so splitting the screen, using a lot of Google applications I've heard and talked to teachers about. Zoom Zoom now has buttons where you can actually engage in the chat in structured ways. And
Mm-hmm.
so I've seen people be creative about how to do it. Now, for me, in my discipline, I'm a science educator. So science teaching becomes incredibly difficult because we can't do labs.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things that I've seen people do is completely shift and do kitchen-based science.
Mm.
So now they're saying, go to your kitchen, find some vinegar and some baking soda. We're going to do an experiment about gas exchange. So because of the switch shift, the quick shift rather, teachers have been extremely inventive in figuring out ways to adjust. Now, the problem is we need everybody together to communicate best practices so that we can adopt them quicker.
Okay. As we go into the fall, and we go forward, what are some of your big hopes, and where do you see opportunities for us to grow in the next 5 to 6 months as we go through this next phase of the COVID situation?
So what I'm going to say next, I'm sure, is probably not what people like to hear. Um, I'm of the attitude that pausing is okay.
Mm.
That instead of worrying about what's missed, whether or not we're behind, that saying this is a first of its kind pandemic, and we need to emerge from this healthy and whole as human beings. And so part of what we need to do moving forward is to make sure the next 6 months we change our goals and standards. And it shouldn't be about how much stuff the kids have learned, but how healthy they are, right? How we
Wow.
produce
Totally
better
agree.
learners, right? And so part of what I'm concerned about is a shift in the attitude. Think about it. In other contexts, people are like, let me leave my child behind a year in school so they can get an advantage. So why aren't we taking that same attitude about this particular time? Why don't we use these next 6 months to help our kids become better learners? Let's teach them how to learn independently and collectively. Let's build a psychological health. Let's get them connected to people like themselves to say, it's okay. You're going to be special, right? And then let's make sure that they have the spiritual grounding that they need to really thrive in the months to come.
Wow. I just love that. I think that's like such good advice. Um, is there anything you want to leave the people with right
No, well, I want us to be producers and not consumers.
now? Mm-hmm.
And that we have an opportunity in front of us to lead the way in the way we innovate and how we educate our children, and in the way we innovate and how we stay connected.
Mm-hmm.
I've been utterly impressed, particularly by Black folks in this time of how inventive
Yes.
we've been, right? So whether it be D Nice and completely innovating the way that we listen to music through Instagram, that was brilliant. I'm seeing online concerts. I've seen people that I haven't seen in 30 years with live events and streams and ways to communicate health and relationship advice in digital medium. I want us to continue to innovate in this time and opportunity in a way that we have to, meaning that I want us to recognize what are the things that our kids need, right?
Mm-hmm.
And let's provide them for our kids right now. And we don't need permission. We need to just go out and make sure we're inventors instead of allowing this time to define what we want to become. We have to define it intentionally.
Wow. Wow. Well, Dr. Brown, I want to thank you so much for being on episode 20, milestone episode for us of the Next Project Conversations. as we get into the fall and we start seeing how this whole year unpacks, we definitely have to bring you back because, there's a lot of learning, a lot of impacts, and I think we just have to report from the front lines and see what's happening there. Thank you again, sir.
Thank you for having me, my guy. I hope to see you in person soon.
We will.
All right, brother. Peace.
Hey, everybody, thank you so much for being part of the next project conversation. I need you to join me next week. Wednesday and Thursday, we're going to bring in two very special guests. I know we took a little bit of time off, but now we're back and we're going to continue these conversations because it's absolutely critical. Thank you so much. See you next week.